Hey guys, we're doing the second episode of our podcast with Finn. Today is not a book review, it's a topic, specifically attachment theory. Um, yeah,
It's not a theory or area of knowledge I'm particularly well versed in. So I think it's a bit of a learning one. I'm happy. Kiri and me had talked about it previously, and Kiri had recommended a couple of books. I haven't got around to reading them yet, but I'm interested in learning.
yeah, and also, well, I came interested in attachment theory because I think I like finding the most scientific way to make decisions in life, even in areas that are not particularly scientific, like a relationship. And when I started reading books about relationships, I came across, well, there's a few books that I really like. I like books from Robert Glover, from Mark Manson. I like books from, I don't remember his first name. His surname is Gottman, and I think he has a wife that also writes books. I'm not entirely sure, but they have really nice books. One I think is called Seven Principles of Making Marriage Work. And also I came across a book called um, basically attachment, and talking about secure attachment and avoidant attachment and anxious attachment. And there's a lot of books around this. Um, uh, there's books that focus specifically on anxious attachment that I've started reading recently. Same with books focusing on how to love an avoidant partner and stuff like that. And yeah, it's particularly interesting. I think um, if you guys don't know, we have ChatGPT as part of the podcast here. So I think ChatGPT, can you give us a really good definition of what attachment theory is?
Absolutely. So, attachment theory is basically the psychological model that describes how humans form deep emotional bonds and connections with others, particularly in early childhood with caregivers. The idea is that the way you bond with your primary caregivers kind of sets the template for how you form relationships throughout your life.
So who came up with this idea first? Tell us a bit about the history of how all this started. Because also I've been talking to people like, because I go to therapy, and when I talk to people like counselors and stuff, some of them say some of them are not completely convinced with the whole idea. They say it's more of a like a pop science type thing. So yeah, ChatGPT enlighten us.
Absolutely. So, attachment theory really got its start with a guy named John Bowlby in the mid 20th century. He was a British psychologist who was really interested in how early childhood experiences with caregivers influence our emotional development. And then later on, Mary Ainsworth, who was a colleague of his, did a lot of observational research and came up with these different attachment styles, like secure, anxious, avoidance that you might have heard of. And you're right, there's definitely a bit of debate about it. Some folks in the therapy world see it as super foundational, and others think it's a little more of a guiding framework rather than a hard science. But it's definitely had a huge influence on how we think about relationships and development.
I feel that's just a natural thing that happens in psychology in general. Like, many psychological theories are constantly debated, and there's very few
Yeah.
psychological facts, well, sort of hard facts within the field of psychology. And we see this with the replicability crisis, in the sense that, like, what we had previously thought was very well established results that acted as kind of foundational knowledge in psychology, turns out we can't replicate those results. They're probably actually maybe not as foundational or secure as we thought. I mean, yeah, there's probably like there's thousands of studies that at this point have not been able to be replicated. And I to be honest, I wouldn't be able to tell you off the top of my head.
No, I
So-
definitely agree with what you are saying. I was just curious to ChatGPT tell us some examples of things in psychology that in the end weren't able to be replicated and are kind of disproven now.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really interesting part of psychology. So, a classic example is the ego depletion theory. This idea that your willpower is like a muscle that gets tired the more you use it. That was super popular, but a lot of replication attempts have been kind of mixed or haven't really held up as strongly as we thought.
Wait a
Another one is the Stanford
second.
Prison experiment.
Wait a second.
It's super famous.
So with the first one you said, so I recall a podcast. I don't remember the book of the author that was talking at the podcast, but he was saying that he was describing this experiment where if you spend a lot of like discipline, let's say I'm not going to eat the marshmallow, then you don't have much discipline and motivation left to do another activity that requires discipline and motivation. So you're saying that's starting to be controversial now? Or is it another idea and I'm confusing it? Don't be agreeable, just tell us.
I think you're right, Kiri. That concept is in question, and there's the research that had previously suggested that this is the case.
So you're remembering it right. That whole idea that if you
Yeah. This is why this phone is shit.
What is it that just because it's Android, do you reckon?
It's cheap and it's shit.
Yeah, exactly. So it's definitely one of those areas where
Anyway, but so it seems to be around that idea. I didn't know that was like. Well, what's the opposite of that? Fuck, we're talking about attachment. We will come back to attachment theory. We'll put some note, like what's those
Tangent.
like
Bookmarks.
bookmarks. We'll put some bookmarks. Let me read what it says. Yes, absolutely. It's a really interesting part of psychology. So a classic example is it's talked to us already about that. So the ego depletion theory. Emotion is a muscle that gets tired the more you use it. Interesting. Okay. So what is it suggesting that we have infinite? So are you suggesting that we have infinite willpower then?
No.
I see what you did there. Well, not quite suggesting infinite willpower, but it does mean that the idea of willpower being this finite resource isn't as clear-cut as we once thought. So maybe we've got a bit more flexibility and resilience than just a single muscle that gets worn out.
I think it is more. It's lesser about it being infinite, but more like the mechanism by which it does deplete is not just more use necessarily. I think there's more complicated psychological and environmental factors that contribute to having more or less willpower than just, I was really disciplined this morning, so I don't have any more discipline. Yeah, exactly.
What factors?
Well, I'm not an expert on this research at all, so I'd probably chatting complete shit here. But I would guess it would be, along the lines of kind of things about how it relates to notions of self and foundational aspects of that person's self-image, and obviously the survivability, the kind of from an evolutionary perspective, the kind of activities that would.
Hush, I have. Closey.
From an evolutionary perspective, I guess, framing, being in environmental situations where, it kind of activates that survival aspect or instinct or adrenaline or those types of things can obviously massively affect willpower. But again, honestly, I have never even really read the literature on this. I have no idea what I'm talking about.
So ChatGPT, which experiment, and we'll come back to attachment theory now, which experiments start to question this idea of the ego depletion thing? And what exactly were the methods used and what exactly happened in these experiments that showed that?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's dive into that a little bit. So one of the big waves of questioning the ego depletion idea came from what we call the replication crisis in psychology. Researchers started doing these large-scale replication projects where they tried to recreate classic studies, and ego depletion was one of them. In these replication attempts, they basically repeated the original methods, which often involved giving people a task that was supposed to drain their willpower, like resisting eating cookies and then doing a difficult puzzle afterward. But a lot of these replication studies found that the effects just wasn't as strong, or sometimes didn't show up at all.
So you also mentioned as the second one example, you said something about the Stanford experiment.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Stanford Prison Experiment is another really famous one that has faced a lot of scrutiny. It was originally done in Ariomyrtis by Philip Zimbardo. The idea was to see how people would conform to roles of prisoners and guards in a simulated prison environment. It became this kind of go-to example of how situational forces can lead people to behave in really extreme ways. But over the years, people have found that it wasn't quite as scientifically rigorous as it seemed. There were issues with how participants were coached and how the environment was set up. And a lot of modern researchers have raised questions about whether we can really draw those big sweeping conclusions from it.
And also there was a lot of issues with the way that the statistical analysis was set up within a lot of those older psychological experiments.
What do you mean?
So they engage in different aspects of what's known as like p-hacking, where you basically sort of set up the analysis in such a way that it massively increases your chance of finding a significant result.
I see.
So like they run, hundreds of different analyses, and then kind of be like, oh yeah, this one's significant, and then kind of, post hoc select that significant result and then kind of write about that, rather than, which is statistically a mistake, because what you should do, and what now is becoming common practice, is to pre-register your study, where you put, before you've even done any data collection, you pre-register the introduction and like the proposal and the hypothesis, importantly, and your plan of how you're going to analyze the results. And then you can only analyze, what you said you would before, so that it stops you from like sifting through the data and then like just trying to find kind of weird connections and then kind of like extrapolating from that.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you do that, if you're running like 100 tests, then your chance of finding a significant p-value increases, but it doesn't necessarily mean that like it's actually meaningful, just because a p-value means that there's less than 1% or less than 5% chance that it's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But there's still that chance. So then if you run 100 of them, then there's going to be 5 by statistical that are wrong, but then you can say, oh yeah, found a significant value. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah. Can we explain what p-value is for people that don't know?
Oh, okay. So it's just it is just the value, the proportional value that basically, given the data, this result, like is significantly likely to happen again.
Cool. Okay, back to attachment theory.
Yeah.
So I'm going to make an attempt to do an introduction of what I know, take it with a pinch of salt, and then we'll have ChatGPT kind of fact checking us. In fact, I'm going to open ChatGPT right now. So, just like, sorry guys. So,
sorry, I just want to.
Yeah.
I think the point, and maybe like the reason that kind of whole like doubts in psychology and the replication crisis conversation might be relevant here is like a lot of these psychological theories, and particularly like the psychological categories, they're not definitive, I think. And that's an important thing to bear in mind, is like very rarely, say for example, we're talking about avoidant attachment or, anxious attachment. Very, very rarely will you find someone just completely
Perfect.
is in that category.
Yes.
So say if we imagine we
This
have
is
like
what-
a triangle of like avoidant, normal, and anxious, usually people are going to fit, somewhere in the middle of that triangle and not on the edge.
Yes.
So like, and I think this is a main thing with a lot of categorical thinking in psychology is like, oh, I'm,
This 5 personality.
yeah, exactly. All these
Yeah.
personality types, like high in openness and all this type of thing. It's like they're always, almost always sliding scales, and the actual reality of the situation is a lot more complicated than just I fit this box perfectly.
I think this is why I really like interacting, like non-linear dynamics and chaos theory and all of that, because it gives a fresh new perspective into kind of and more complexity and complexity, exactly.
But saying that, these categories, I think, are a useful, like they can be useful like signposts on the map, the landscape that is the mind. And you can be like, okay, like I'm closer to this peak of avoidant attachment than over on that area of the landscape that's more anxious attachment. I might be, more in this direction. So it's definitely, I think it's extremely useful to think about. And also it then allows you to make actionable changes. But yeah, go ahead.
No, yeah. So, okay. I'm going to try to talk a little bit about what I know as an introduction to this, and then ChatGPT can fact check me. So basically, when we're young, certain experiences that we have as children, particularly experiences that we have with our caregivers, might shape how our nervous system will react in the future when it's, let's say, in an intimate relationship with someone. So, for instance, if your emotional needs were not met as a kid and you were rewarded really strongly for being independent, and then maybe other people really made you responsible for their emotions, as an adult, you perhaps might adopt more of an avoidant attachment style because um, um, you really value independence, you really value not depending on other people because maybe you didn't have your needs met if you depended on other people as a child. Or on the other hand, if you as a child had maybe very conditional love and then people showed you some love and then kind of pulled back and you ran towards them. There's a really nice experiment. I was watching it with my dad and our and my niece. It was really cute. So basically, I've read this in the book too. ChatGPT can fact check me. So they put the kid in a room with toys, and the caregiver is with them initially, and then the caregiver leaves the room. So anxiously attached children usually will run immediately to the door, crying, saying, "Oh, where is my mom?" or something. Whereas more secure children will play a little bit with the toys first, and then maybe if mom's away for like some considerable amount of time, then they'll start thinking in a more reasonable reaction. So they'll start thinking, "Oh, where's mom?" Like, whereas avoidant children might even prolong that kind of time until they search for their caregiver. And so, yeah, but going back to the anxious attachment, it seems like people who might have a fear of abandonment or maybe have been receiving mixed signals in terms of love as children. And I think there is a lot more kind of things that can happen in your childhood that can form your kind of nervous system reactions as an adult, but I'm just mentioning a couple and then we can go into more detail afterwards. And then you have kind of a more secure attachment where I guess I don't know much about because I struggle being a very securely attached person. ChatGPT, okay, so things that I've maybe said wrong, maybe make a better introduction than mine in terms of kind of what each category means, and then maybe suggest to me and Finn, where shall we take the conversation afterwards? How shall we open it up?
Yeah, absolutely. And first off, I think you gave a really nice overview, you definitely hit the main points of how those childhood experiences with caregivers can kind of shape the different attachment styles we have as adults. So just to kind of fact check you and fill in a little bit of the detail, yeah, with avoidant attachment, it's really about that emphasis on independence, often because maybe those needs weren't fully met in childhood. With anxious attachment, you're spot on that it's often about that fear of abandonment or that mixed signaling that leads to a kind of hypervigilance in relationships. And then secure attachment is basically when you've had those needs met in a consistent way as a kid. So you feel pretty comfortable being close to others, but also being independent. In terms of where we can go from here, we could definitely talk more about how these attachment styles play out in adult relationships, or how people can move toward a more secure attachment if they feel like they have some of those other patterns. So let me know which direction sounds good to you.
So
Yeah, I'd be interested. So how do they manifest? How do they manifest
tell me, how do they manifest?
in adult relationships?
What do you mean? So, okay, I'm going to keep this open. So, what do you mean, how do they manifest? Like, how the behavior?
So someone that is due to, say, for example, fear of abandonment as a child, they become anxiously attached. How does that manifest within a more intimate relationship when they're an adult?
So it's interesting because it seems to me like, so a secure and an anxious person can have a relationship together, or a secure and an avoidant person. And if that secure person is really secure, they can help the anxious or avoidant person become more secure over time. An avoidant and an avoidant together would rarely mix, because no one's going to make the initial effort.
Okay, they'll
and
just
the effort to
they'll
continue
just
the
drift
relationship.
out of
Yeah.
contact.
And anxious
Great,
and
great.
anxious, I'm not too sure. Anxious avoidant is where vicious cycles begin, because it's one pulls away, the other comes and rushes behind, then the anxious one eventually gives up. Then and so it's this weird vicious cycle. But it seems to me the way they manifest in adult relationships is things might start off normally, and then if things start getting more serious and intimate, usually there's some kind of trigger that's gonna trigger an avoidant, and so, for instance, let's say, let's find a good foreign example. Let's say a couple don't see each other for 2 weeks because one of the two people goes on holiday. Maybe that triggers some kind of, so this is called like an attachment system activation. So the nervous system gets activated. So the anxious person will start getting anxious, and then that may make them needy. And then if they express a lot of emotional dependence, and if they want a lot of reassurance from their partner, that might be avoidant. That's going to trigger their nervous system to be activated, because they don't really feel nice when people emotionally depend on them. They also feel their independence threatened. They feel that they're losing their freedom. And so they're going to start pulling away. That's going to make the anxious person even worse, because they're like, oh shit, my insecurities are coming through, like my doubts are manifesting themselves to reality. And so I think that's kind of how it manifests. I think there's some kind of external trigger that will trigger one of them, and that's going to trigger the other person. Whereas if it's a secure person with an insecure person, that trigger might trigger the insecure person, but the secure person won't receive it as a threat. So let's say if their insecure partner starts pulling away a little bit because they might have become overwhelmed with something, or if they're a bit too clingy, if they're anxious, a secure person might say, that's okay. Like their nervous system won't necessarily react they won't feel threatened, so it's going to de-escalate by itself. Maybe after a few days, the trigger goes away. The other partner is secure, so they don't feed into the other person's cycle. Their own cycle doesn't start. So that's kind of how I interpret it. I wonder what questions you have, and I wonder what ChatGPT thinks too.
Yeah, I think you've actually done a really great job of laying that out. Honestly, your explanation is pretty spot on. You've really captured how these different attachment styles can kind of ping pong off each other, and how a secure person can help stabilize things, whereas two avoidant or two anxious people together might have a tougher time. So I think you've got a really solid handle on it. And maybe from here, we could dive into how people can work on becoming more secure over time if they have one of those insecure styles. Or we could chat about how attachment theory might show up in friendships or even workplace dynamics. Let me know what you're curious about next.
I sorry guys. I should have done this before. I wonder what you think, bro, like of this idea.
Yeah, I mean, it does. It certainly makes a lot of sense. Like, I like what is like? How do you define like? Yeah, I mean, again, I have some sort of doubts. I think this should be okay. I reckon in terms of like where do you draw the line? Do you know what I mean like how do you like if someone is secure sometimes or and I feel like it's it's very situationally dependent
Yeah.
a lot of the time. Like it can just sometimes both people could be you know secure in their attachment and then certain environmental factors occur and suddenly one person becomes more anxious, the other person might stay secure. Like, and I guess what is it? Just where is it that you more often find yourself? Is what category you would be traditionally defined into? Like, what place do you find yourself more than the others? Kind of thing. Is it that, or is it just is a secure person just always secure? Like there's never any. Do you know what I mean?
I know. So ChatGPT, I have the same question. So like, okay, from what I remember too. So and again, ChatGPT will fact check me. Do you remember that psychologist where he's the imprinting thing? So he's walking and there's this really cool picture, and then there's a few ducks behind him in a line just following him, because they think it's that psychologist is their parent, basically, the duck parent. And so from what I understand, the whole point is like there's that zone of development when you're a child where like a critical zone where certain things kind of will define a big part of your like it will be really hard to snap, which is really cool because we can talk a bit about free will too, because there's sometimes in my life, bro, I know that rationalizing something, I can rationalize what I should be doing, but my nervous system is gives such of a strong reaction that it's like, it's almost like I have no free will to act. I just have enough free will to say out loud what my body is doing. It's like being really, really high on acid or something.
I mean, I don't believe in free will at all. So
Okay, so we can get into that too. But yeah, so ChatGPT, where do you draw the line? Because it's a very binary thing. I remember from reading the books, I might be wrong, but yeah. So how is it for someone to change an attachment style? And are you always secure? Can you behave securely sometimes, avoidant other times? So what's going on? Please base your answer on the actual literature.
Absolutely. Let's dive into that. So, you're right that attachment styles aren't necessarily set in stone for your entire life. The literature definitely suggests that while you might have a dominant attachment style, like you might lean more anxious or more avoidant or more secure, it's not a rigid box. People can absolutely shift over time, especially with new experiences or with supportive relationships. And about that imprinting example you mentioned, that's from Konrad Lorenz, by the way, with the ducks imprinting on him as a parental figure. It's a bit of a different concept, but you're right that early experiences do create these patterns in our nervous system. But that doesn't mean they're unchangeable. It's more like a template that can be rewritten with time and effort. In terms of shifting styles, a lot of research shows that therapy, self-awareness, and healthy relationships can help people move toward a more secure attachment style over time. It's definitely not a binary thing. You can be mostly secure but have moments of anxiety or avoidance, especially under stress. So it's a spectrum, and it's definitely possible to grow and change, which is kind of the hopeful part of it.
okay, and in terms of mentioned like therapy, good relationships, and experience. So let's try and like what 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 is a good relationship in this definition, like in terms of, what are the hallmarks of a relationship that will allow someone to move from an insecure attachment style to a secure attachment style?
I want to add a little bit to this too. So, for instance, the example that I told you, maybe if so if you do something, let's say you are dating, let's make an imaginary person. Okay, so John is dating Mary, and John is going to meet Mary's parents. And John is a bit scared, so he cancels the first time because it's quite an intimate thing. Mary is secure, so she is going to say, okay, maybe he was a little bit tired. That's going to make John feel really nice. If Mary was very anxious and she started thinking, he doesn't love me anymore, blah, 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 that might cause John to even pull back even more. But if, let's say, Mary is secure and then John doesn't receive a lot of pressure, then they'll reschedule the thing, and then John's going to feel like, oh, okay. I didn't get pressure. The second time I was scared. I did it. We went to the parents. It was fine. And that might heal him a little bit. So I think if you continuously have these healing experiences where the secure partner helps you, well, then that might, I guess, slowly heal you as a person. But surely though, well, you shouldn't depend fully on your partner to just do the job for you. So definitely I think go understand. I think surely the first step in my mind is accepting that you have some tendencies either to be very anxious or pull away.
I briefly, again, I haven't read this book, disclosure, but I did look at some summaries, and it seemed like you're right, in terms of acceptance, and then also communication. So like, say for example, I'm avoidant, and I've communicated to my partner that I can be avoidant sometimes in my attachment, and rather than like when I initially get that kind of feeling of this is a bit too much, or like, and I feel myself wanting to pull away, I communicate that to them and say, look, I just need a little bit of time by myself, and it's not because of you or anything like that. It's my own thing.
Yeah.
And then the pressure's off, because then you can spend that time by yourself, and you don't feel like this also, like, feel bad or feel anxious about the fact that you're doing this, and then that kind of furthers the cycle of like pushing them away to try and protect them or whatever. And just like, I guess it comes from, and when we get into this, but it comes from noticing your thoughts initially, and noticing your emotions, noticing where they come from, and then trying to, I guess, view them. This is going into the sort of meditative philosophy, but trying to view them kind of a bit objectively and communicate them, and then they're not so powerful.
Yeah, and also I think letting other people observe your behavior, your friends, your family, and I think being open to listening, is this behavior of doing normal or not, and not feeling shame if it's not. Like if your friends think that you're being overly anxious, for instance. I need to go to the toilet, so we need to have a small 5-minute break. There's also different subtypes of attachment. So ChatGPT will fact check me again. So we have fearful avoidance, we have dismissive avoidance, we also have an anxious avoidant kind of mix, and also ChatGPT, and I think we also have anxious preoccupied and some other subtypes. So ChatGPT talked to us about the subtypes and their differences, and also I think Finn raised a really good point, which I feel like we haven't clarified totally yet. The fact that we're kind of thinking of it as kind of a spectrum, and also as kind of all these attachment kind of behaviors can overlap, or maybe one person can have secure behaviors and anxious behaviors and avoidant ones. I remember reading the book. They said that a person has like, because it's based on their childhood, has like a predominant one kind of. But explain me that, because it seems to be like almost too simple to be true, like that we have this general formula and you fit perfectly into one category. Tracking.
Absolutely. Let's break that down a bit. So you're right. Attachment styles definitely have these subtypes, and it's not just a simple one-size-fits-all box. So on top of the main categories like secure, anxious, and avoidant, you do have these subtypes. For example, there's dismissive avoidant, which is someone who really values independence and might push people away if they feel like they're getting too close. There's fearful avoidant, which is kind of a mix where someone might really want closeness, but also be really scared of it, so there's a push-pull dynamic. And then there's anxious preoccupied, which is someone who might really crave closeness and be very focused on their relationship, but also worry a lot about being abandoned. And you're totally right that people usually have a predominant style, but it's definitely more of a spectrum. You can have a primary style and still show traits of the others, depending on the situation or depending on who you're with. It's not a rigid formula, and it's definitely not too simple to be true. It's just a helpful framework. So think of it as a kind of starting point for understanding yourself or other people. But there's always room for nuance.
Can you expand on those subcategories a little bit more, ChatGPT? Because I feel like you just repeated the general, like avoidant or anxious category. Like what makes them the actual difference in the subcategories?
Yeah, and also you mentioned anxious preoccupied, so what different types of anxious do we have anyway?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's dive a bit deeper into those subcategories. So when we talk about the avoidant category, for instance, a dismissive avoidant is really someone who not only values their independence, but might genuinely downplay the importance of close relationships. They might come across as emotionally distant or really self-reliant to the point where they kind of avoid vulnerability or emotional closeness because they feel safer that way. Now, the fearful avoidant, on the other hand, is a bit more conflicted. They actually do want intimacy deep down, but they have a lot of fear around it. So they might feel like they want closeness, but then when they get it, they might pull away because it feels overwhelming or scary. And on the anxious side, when we talk about anxious preoccupied, this is someone who's really focused on their relationships and might be very sensitive to any signs of rejection or distance. They might need a lot of reassurance and can sometimes come off as a bit more dependent on their partner's approval or attention. So yeah, it's definitely more nuanced, and you can think of these subtypes as just different flavors of anxiety or avoidance or security. And people can shift and show traits from more than one subtype over time. It's all about that spectrum.
What do you think?
I don't know, it's interesting. I'm just applying it to myself.
I was thinking, okay, I'm gonna let you into some information about it. So I'm trying to understand how to be more secure. Okay, let's pull out some names, guys. I'll tell you the books I'm reading. So Jessica, I think it's Jessica Boehm is the girl I'm reading. Her book. She has a nice podcast with Chris Williamson too. So Avoidant by Jeb Kinnison. This is really interesting because I think, let's say you identify as someone that's really anxious and you identify some qualities of your partner as being avoidant. I think understanding their perspective might even be more important than understanding their own perspective, just because you can empathize more with them if you do that. It's the same as if you're dating someone with ADHD and they're a bit forgetful sometimes with things. I remember I had a partner in the past with ADHD, and I started reading Dr. Hollowell's books on ADHD, and I'm like, okay, this fits her personality quite well. And then it allows you to show empathy. So the other book, it's Anxiously Attached by Jessica Boehm. And also Secure Love by Julie Menano. There's a few Scott Young, Master Your Attachment Style. relationship OCD is also a really good topic we could get into. Okay, why? So, in my journey of trying to kind of become more secure, reading these books, there seems to be a few methods that help, a few methods that I've tried and don't help as much. But it's general information I get from these books. So, box breathing, I don't know, mate. Box breathing is great when everything is fine. When everything's not fine, it's really hard for me to like get any benefits sometimes, or at least that's how it feels. Also, seeing things around you and just naming, okay, that's a door, that's a laundry basket, that's that. Apparently, it does something to your brain. Another thing, there's a really cool visualization. You think about you as a kid, maybe you were abandoned, and then you bring people from your present and love you, and then you do this visualization, and then let's say you're 5 years old and you were abandoned in the trash can by your mom or something, and then let's say I have some really lovely housemates like Ben and Jordan and Oli and Omar. So I did this visualization thinking of them like a week ago, just them coming into the room with me being like a kid and just coming and telling me, we are here for you, blah blah blah. And that kind of, I think Jessica, because like your little me kind of feels the love almost, and that kind of helps you heal. So that visualization is really nice. Other things I've noticed, sometimes as an anxious person, you might get a bit of an anxiety spike, like an anxiety episode. I think it's hard at those moments to kind of figure things out, but I think not reacting, let's say maybe the cause of stress came from your partner. I think understanding that it's not necessarily their fault, and just not reacting and reaching out towards them maybe for maybe even a day just to relax. Maybe some cold exposure, like a cold shower or a cold ice cube, holding it, or doing a bunch of push-ups really fast immediately, or going for a run. Something to almost burn the adrenaline, just...
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, like pretty much all the things you just mentioned, I'm just directly relating to like aspects of different meditation techniques, and how they actually, like, at their core, the reason why all these things that you mentioned work is because they hit the same core points as meditation techniques. So obviously, the box breathing, brings you into your body. For one, it makes you focus on your breathing, which for one brings your attention away from your thoughts. In theory, if you do it,
Bravo. Yes.
brings your attention away from your thoughts into your body, into your lived experience. And also, the more that you connect with your breath, the more you do start to connect with that kind of autonomic subconscious aspect of yourself. And that's where a lot of the turmoil is living. And if you're too cerebral, too high up in your, lost in these spaghettis of crazy thoughts, you're so far away from your body, where really like the emotion is living, where you can actually understand the emotion a little bit better. The cold exposure, again, brings you straight back to your body. You can't avoid being lost in your head when you're freezing cold and everything in your body is screaming at you. What was some of the other ones you mentioned?
Physical exercise immediately, maybe sprints or push-ups.
And the again, it's the aspect of trying to bring your conscious experience away from this level of the level of experience that is kind of these muddled thoughts. There's like when you do meditate and you spend time away from the thoughts, consciousness can be just a lot more pure and peaceful. And the more you're able to bring your conscious experience into that peaceful, objective state, and the less you're being dragged, head over heels by the feet sometimes down these thoughts you don't want to be going down, and you're able just to watch that thought occur objectively, watch it drift alongside you and not get attached to it, the more you're able to avoid these anxious elements. And interesting that you spoke about the imagining yourself as a child and like the people you love basically giving you love. There's a very well-known technique called metta, which is loving kindness in Pali. And there's many ways to practice metta, but the kind of the most basic way is to essentially, you're wishing love and happiness
practices
to everyone in the world, or all beings, or people you love, or people you don't like, or specific people. That it's often easier to start with.
Yeah, and then they make you says, who is someone that's making difficult?
Yeah, exactly. Someone who's making your life difficult. We start with someone you really love,
Yeah.
and you feel that feeling. You wish them. I wish them to be happy. I wish them to be free from suffering. You really feel that emotion in your chest or wherever you might feel it as much as you can, and then you try and carry that same level of like, I truly wish them to be happy, and then carry that same level of emotion and then pass it on to someone you don't know, some random guy in a shop, or then someone you accidentally dislike. And then
it's hard.
It's very hard.
Fucking hard.
It's fucking hard, man. It's difficult, but that's a great practice. And actually, there is I have done guided techniques before, where the teacher has said, okay, next, imagine yourself as a child. And this is because a lot of people struggle with self-love, and they struggle, they have these insecurities or these like things they hate about themselves, and they think they don't deserve love and all these types of things, and they struggle to, they might be able to carry that love even for someone they hate, but then they actually might find it even more difficult to carry that love to themselves. But often imagining yourself as a child, or imagining really anyone as a child, it's like, that's just innocence. What they deserve love. Like, they haven't done anything yet to deserve hatred or ill will towards them. And that, that child deserves the best opportunity. And you can't deny that. Like, so imagining yourself as a child and then giving your childhood self that love can be a really good way to kind of get around that self-hatred.
Yeah, and what
amazing. So many people.
It's not only just fucking saying, oh yeah, I love myself, I'm worth it. Because there's one thing saying it in an intellectual level, like just rationalizing the idea, and it's another thing experiencing it. And you're very familiar with this because Finn, guys, like, does lots of meditation. You went for your meditation retreat, obviously, and you meditated for basically all day for a couple of weeks. And there's a difference between saying to the other, like saying, okay, I'm letting go of attachment to outcome, and fucking meditating, experience, and it's almost,
it does kind of like, I mean, it on one hand is kind of feels a bit like pretentious and kind of like dismissive to be like, oh yeah, you don't really know until you've experienced it. But
it's the same as the fucking
it's kind of Mary's Room.
Yes, this is what I was going to say, and it's the same as the what's that thought experiment, the Chinese typewriter or whatever it's called. I don't know, when it's like fucking hell. Let's pull up ChatGPT.
Well, I'll explain Mary's Room while you're getting that one. So Mary's Room is the idea that you had some researcher that was born in a room, like a black and white room, say, that had no color whatsoever, or and this person was then spent their whole life basically studying the color red, or whatever color. But they know all the wavelengths, every aspect of the physics behind the wavelengths, and every aspect of how it hits, the back of the eye and activates the optic nerve, and then goes into V1, all this types of stuff, and it goes up through the optical chain, and it has all this knowledge of how color works, what things are red, what things are not red, and how different colors mix to become red.
I don't know how we found a way to sleep consciousness in the conversation.
But, this is all intellectual knowledge. She's never actually seen red. And the question is, does she learn something new when she steps out of that room, a black and white room, and sees red for the first time? And the intuitive answer is yes. Like that experience of that phenomenal experience of actually seeing red and really feeling it is something that no matter how much you intellectualize it, you just can't understand.
Yes.
And with a lot of these things, you know, about the self-love and also about kind of like the bringing yourself away from your thoughts and really what thoughts are in your head. It's easy to be like, say, oh yeah, you know, just don't attach yourself to your thoughts. It's okay, yeah, I kind of get that, but like until you experience it, it's very hard to really instantiate and like bring into your life.
And also the opposite, you said it really nicely. And so the opposite, like words like the following mean little to nothing to me, nearly nothing, not nothing, nearly nothing. Saying to myself, oh yeah, I feel lots of love for myself, I'm worth it. Or maybe saying I'm enough. This means little to nothing if my whole body is screaming, my whole nervous system is activated and it's like screaming, you're abandoned and you're about to die and you don't have oxygen. It's like that's why I'm saying I feel like I have no free will in terms of I have just enough free will to say out loud what I'm experiencing. I have just enough free will to say out loud that I have no free will with what I'm experiencing. And I'm not saying this is, but I do think I have 1% free will. And then if I do the right things on that day, I'll have 2% free will the next day. And then it's going to become 1% easier and 1% easier. I think eventually that anxious attachment might become more secure, like step by step by step. But it's really hard. And I think that's why I think some people think, okay, people never change. But I think they do. Like, I have personally people that change. But it's fucking difficult. So maybe it's 1 in 100 that's going to have a major change in their lives.
You need to do significant things to change.
Yes.
Like if you expect someone to change, but nothing in their experience, their past experience, and you know, nothing in their environment or their way of thinking, in terms of like the type of information they're exposed to, changes, then they're not going to change. Well, you know, they still will develop, and you know, they're not the exact same person as they would have been 30 years ago. I think the self is a constantly evolving thing, but yeah, in order to really have a significant shift in trajectory and almost have like a not quite unrecognizable, but you know, that kind of wow, that person is really turned a new page and living a different type of life. You need a huge amount of error correction in your predictive models of the world.
Yes.
And those error corrections do not come about unless you put yourself in situations where you're going to get these.
Do the right thing 1,000 times. Yeah. Like it's going to like small incremental step, like the Kaizen. What are those Japanese lots to the Asians? I don't remember. I have the book here.
But yeah, I mean, like, you know, very commonly used examples of these big changes would be, you know, really, you know, challenging yourself to, you know, study something new or travel to a different place and really putting yourself, or yeah, even psychedelic trips or, you know, things like this where you're really putting yourself in a challenging, difficult place where you're not comfortable. Mm-hmm. And you have to navigate that space and work out the best way to exist there. And those learning curves are the ones that generally lead to the kind of biggest shifts in individual self.
And I think linking it back to the whole attachment theory, if you guys identify with a certain attachment style and you would like to make a change, it's not an overnight thing. I think identifying, and this is a good idea for ChatGPT to step in. So I think identifying the behaviors that you guys do that match with the attachment. For instance, an avoidant person might feel trapped. They might feel like they're drowning. They might feel like they have to run away immediately. Otherwise, they don't have oxygen and they're going to die. And then an anxious person might feel exactly the opposite, that it's really urgent. I have to fix this now. I need reassurance. I need the other person to tell me they love me. If you identify with these things, I think the first step is understanding that, okay, I have this experience. A lot of it is biological, and also my partner's experience is biological. And then ChatGPT, I want you to explain to us kind of thoroughly, as much as you can, about how the nervous system reacts, and talk to us about sympathetic and parasympathetic and all of that. And also, I think just realizing that it's going to be a step-by-step process towards becoming more secure, and that your partner might or might not be able to help you out because they might have the opposite insecure style and they might freak out. So maybe you'll need to be helped by friends. Because I think ultimately, to heal as anxious, yes, you have to learn that, just seeking endless reassurance might give you short-term kind of relaxation, but it's not going to be a long-term solution. But I do think that you need to experience some love, either by your friends. This is a good question. I would also like to ask you, brother, because I don't know if you can actually if you can actually feel self-love, if you've never experienced love from an external source. And that it doesn't even need to be a big external source. It might be a dog that comes and like hugs you unconditionally, or maybe it's a random person in the street that had a nice behavior towards you, or maybe it's a friend of yours that you can call when you're feeling like this. It doesn't need to be your partner that you go there and ask, like, do you still love me? And I think that's part of what feeds the anxious loop too, unless your partner is really secure. But even then, I think then you should build that healing of finding kind of not feeling abandoned from friends, from within yourself. But yeah, just some general ideas anyway that I threw around. I wonder what you think, bro. Also, let's see what ChatGPT thinks before we go to you, because
Yeah, absolutely. I think you touched on a lot of great points. And just to build on that, from a biological or nervous system perspective, when we talk about attachment and why we feel these things, it often does come down to how our nervous system is responding. So if you're more on the anxious side, it's like your sympathetic nervous system is a little more easily triggered into at fight or flight mode, and you feel that urgency to get reassurance. And if you're on the avoidance side, you might feel that same fight or flight response, but it tells you to run away or to create space so you can breathe. And you're absolutely right that the journey to becoming more secure isn't just about leaning on a partner. It's about finding different sources of support, friends, community, even pets, and also building that internal sense of self-compassion.
fuck you.
Over time, those little experiences can add up and help reshape how you feel. So it's definitely a process, but it's absolutely possible.
Fuck you. What do you think, bro? Do you think you have to experience love? Like, can you find love within yourself without kind of experiencing it? I guess it's a weird question because you can't really put yourself, like we were talking about Nothing, the book last time, can't put yourself in a vacuum. And I guess many things, if you change the perspective you look things at, can identify someone's behavior as loving, even though it might not be loving in first sight.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be definitely more difficult. Like if you hadn't ever experienced love being directed to you.
You don't even know what it is.
Yeah. But I think it would be possible. And also, I think maybe, I don't know whether this is a good segue. I don't know, not entirely sure if it's exactly related, but like a lot of the Buddhist teachings will prioritize compassionate love and the kind of try and promote compassionate love, which they would claim is a infinite version of love. If you really live in compassionate love versus self-interested love, so the difference being, whether my love for someone, and I think particularly in a relationship, like an intimate relationship, you know, this is a lot more common, and I'm not convinced actually whether this Buddhist teaching is always correct in this notion. I'm not sure about what to think about it exactly, but the idea would be that in a relationship you have self-interested love, where basically it's almost like you're loving yourself, and your love for the other person is almost like a reflection of that self-love. So it's like, I love them, so then they will love me back, or I love them so then I can gain companionship, or I can gain emotional support, or all these types of things. But really, it's kind of I'm not saying consciously, but subconsciously, it's directed towards yourself rather than a purely compassionate love is, I love this person no matter if I ever get anything back from them.
Yes.
And if I never get anything in return, I will absolutely unconditionally love this person. It's more common from like a parent to small child perspective. It's the most sort of common instantiation of.
Which is what I was feeling in the situation we were talking before. It's like even if the other person stuns me of everything, I still care about them.
Yeah, of course. But like this, and the kind of point I was making as well is like that Buddhists claim that this compassionate love can, once you tap into it and really meditate on it and really focus on that aspect, is like almost like an infinite well, and you can kind of love everyone compassionately more than you could ever love anyone in a self-interested way. Again, this is one of those claims that maybe if you've experienced it, you would be able to verify it. I have definitely not achieved that level of meditative kind of love or power yet, but that's, I mean, this is a claim that is made by certain people.
You know what, also, I remember when I was 18, I was feeling a bit self-conscious, and I started trying to focus on removing myself from being the center of attention and just being part of a circle. And I was looking up at my dog's eyes once, and I noticed my reflection on the dog's eyes, and then I used it as a nice analogy to think that if you really focus on other people, like loving other people, putting your attention towards others, and being compassionate towards them, you find yourself inside of them almost. Like you see the reflection of yourself in their eyes almost, because big part of feeling self-conscious is like, okay, I'm not exactly fitting in this room. I'm not exactly feeling inside of my body like I'm connected to myself. I'm feeling a bit unattached, disattached, whatever the word is.
Yeah, because self-consciousness, and I think this is where like most social anxiety comes from, is like you're thinking about what you're saying. It's like, oh, is what I just said like a shit thing to say, or like, or maybe I need to make sure the next thing I say is interesting or cool, or I hope what they didn't think that last thing I said was. You're in this your conscious experience, rather than being in your body and just like behaving in an instinctual, like just almost automatic, you're just like, expressing your conscious experience is more convoluted. It's in this higher kind of thought level. Again, going back to this kind of that whole anxious meditation, things to get you out of anxious thoughts. And like, if you're doing public speaking, the worst thing you can do is like, oh, do I sound good right now? Like, then you're going to stumble. When you're just present, you're in your body, and you're just instinctual. And the Zen Buddhists talk about this a lot, where they talk about how, like, you want to be almost like empty mind, and you want to just allow your subconscious and your instinct to manifest into reality directly.
Interesting. I think there's I agree up to a point. The point that I'm skeptical about is I think there's a certain point where, let's say in science, or in general, if you want to make a rational fucking argument, you don't necessarily just want the words to get spilled out of your mouth and not exactly catching them. Like, I like consciously thinking, okay, what am I saying? Is this like what I'm actually trying to say? But there's a difference between being conscious of what you're saying and just being completely self-conscious. There's a big difference between choosing the right words because they're going to make the best argument for what you're saying and just, yeah, like you said, am I saying the right thing? Is this, is that, having that like huge amount of attention? And I think it's for a lot of people, if they do have this kind of social anxiety, it definitely makes them feel a bit guilty or a bit ashamed. Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder how this like kind of links to what we've been talking about with the avoidant and how much avoidant and anxious attachment is just basically a product of overthinking, but in different directions. You know, I don't know,
Perhaps.
but like, you know, what is there like a core? Because you know, at some level, and this is definitely something I'm very guilty of, is overthinking when it comes to relationships. And it's something that, you know, in other aspects of my life, I'm not an overthinker whatsoever. But then when it comes to relationships, and I can.
You should read Relationship OCD. Is a very interesting book about this. Sorry, continue.
Yeah, but it's just like, what is the
Why is this specifically thing?
Yeah.
Why is this guy that's so tough in all these areas, you know, like doing all these hard things, fighting, studying hard topics, you know, and then suddenly there's some, yeah, it's really interesting, man. It's really interesting. I don't understand how, I'm in the same boat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that ChatGPT will be able to psychoanalyze us well enough.
So we call it a day there?
Yeah, I think it's a good place to start. I think that was a good podcast.
Yeah, this was definitely like an interesting topic, and I really enjoyed it, bro. Okay, next week, hopefully, we're gonna finish Phenomenology of Spirit by Hegel.
Yeah, I've still got a while to go, but yeah, it's a long book. It's a very interesting book, but yeah.
So as a summary, guys, I hope this helped you. I definitely enjoyed the talk, and it definitely helps me to think about attachment theory for my own relationship. I'd advise you guys to watch the books or listen to the books on Audible that we mentioned throughout the podcast, and go fucking do therapy. That's all by me. Finn, anything to add before we close?
I think you can nail that.
Peace. Fairfield. Fuck yeah, dude.